free trial. No, it's not even free trial. Just like a free account.
Free tier, yeah.
There we go. Yeah, and you can have a, I think, a 10-song demonstration portfolio for free forever. So.
Oh, well, great. Just as a reminder for everyone, the program website, each day I'll be adding links. Like here's from the files that he shared the first day, here's the links he shared the second day. So any of the materials that you see today, at the end of the day, Guido will send me a set of links, and I will add those down below. Back down, and we will get, I think it was if you put in here. Here we go, now I can pull it up. Yes, so I'll be adding it underneath here. So come back to the main website, and if you don't have it in your phone, just go ahead and scan the QR code back there. That'll pull it up, and you can jump to it. Or it should be on your registration emails that I send out. I'll send out an update. And if there's any questions you have as follow-ups, remember, I always like to say that the discussion doesn't end at the end of the workshop. This is just the beginning, so hopefully it will encourage all of you to do a little bit more collaboration questions. If you have anything that I can be of help with on the music end, you've got my email address, and just get in touch with me, and I'll do whatever is in my power to help to make it work. So this is our discussion panel. These are always so much fun, and I'm so glad that we have both Steve Stringer and Guido Arcella and Rob Frank. Sorry. That's one advantage of having an incredibly boring name. It's never been started. So anyway. Go ahead and have a seat, Guido. And as a moderator, my job is only to get kind of things started. It's open mainly for Q&A from all of you to cover any topics that are of interest. So I always like to start with a kind of an open-ended question about the future directions that you see coming. What are some future things that technologies or advancements in game music that are in the pipeline or coming that aren't maybe fully implemented yet, or even in the dream phase beyond? What are some things we should all have on our radar as we're looking forward? Big question.
I'll go first. I don't know if there's anything revolutionary. So as we move to Unreal 5, that's going to be a revolutionary set of changes as we go to the next gen performance. But that's mostly on the graphical side of things. Where I see the evolution on gameplay is what used to be the domain of, you all know what I mean by first party versus third party? Okay, so what used to be the domain of just the Sonys and the Microsoft and the first party well-resourced studios to do fully interactive, fully layered, fully emotionally driven, content-driven music. That is becoming much easier and driven down into what I call the indie level of development resources. So like when we can pull it off upstairs in Capstone, you know, it's those are it's not the domain of ultra expensive proprietary tools anymore. So developing skill sets for people that can compose music based on that, to understand the layers, to understand the instrumentation, to understand the emotional drive. Good Lord, it is loud in here. Sorry.
Yeah, it is.
It's like a server rack back there, and they put in server rack fans. So sorry, I'm a little closer. My point is that developing a skill set to compose music and deconstruct it into its constituent pieces, so that when we reconstruct it based on the narrative based on whatever's going on in the game, whatever's going on emotionally, and do so even in combination. So I'm playing Cana, Bridge of Spirits, I think is the full name, but Cana's, it's a PS5 title, I think it's on PC as well, but they do a really good job, I think, on the audioscape, where there's a baseline of what's going on environmentally. There are dramatic sort of zone-based instrumentation to sort of, just like in a movie score where, you know, the main character walks on and they have their own particular musical keynote passage that signals their entrance into the scene. Same thing with the zones in Cana, right? And then on top of that, and this is where I think that next level of sophistication is, there's some emotional beat stuff that's layered on top of whatever the player is doing at that moment. And I think it's really subtle, but it does take it one step beyond, I think, what we've seen in certain games in the past, where, you know, even 5-6 years ago, we just do a monolithic, you know, one-track score that just plays, and maybe you can trigger it when you walk into a zone and maybe fade it out subtly as opposed to just cutting it off. But the subtlety of it, as it drives the emotional response to the game and supports the core gameplay there, is that next evolution, I think.
Great. Yeah. So I think it's still like, talk about like the player's experience on, you know, on the audio and music side of things, and how subtle maybe we're going for on the music scores. And I want to complement that with maybe how the future, maybe mixing wise, you know, like music, sound design, and dialogue. For example, we had an interesting talk back at the GDC some years ago, and we were talking about, okay, well, we have headsets now, you know, like VR stuff, and they were going, I think it was 2017 when the first kind of adventure games, story-driven games were out, right? And you were having, you know, to control a character, right? And you had to go and explore, right? Maybe it was a third-person kind of stuff. It was a weird stuff that you see as, you know, in your headset the player, and you're like interacting with them. And then there's something very very important, that was this plugin, the binaural kind of setup, where you can place a 3D kind of sounds around you, right? It's not anymore left, right, and center, right? So on the sound design kind of things, it was pretty interesting because you could place elements all around you, as you know, UE or Unity it's very friendly on placing sounds, and where your headset moves, you can have it behind, in front. But then all of the time we were facing about the music, right? So there was this composer, I don't remember the name or either the game out of it. It was based about a adult cartoonish type of game, and he did something kind of unusual. So he started playing around with, you know, his band. So he would set up the percussion not in the center, but in the top, okay? Then he will have, you know, the violins on the left, and then, you know, have something, you know, not hard fun, but, you know, placed in kind of a surround mode. What I'm trying to explain is, we start seeing all these first attempts on, you know, mixing on music on a VR kind of level. We saw this when, you know, stereo came out, where we put the drums on pan hard left or something crazy, right? So I saw like this very recently, you know, like all these experiments going around on how music can be affected in a surround type of thing. But then 2018, 2019, I saw that, you know, all of a sudden we are back on a stereo kind of more conservative type of mixing view on the type of music, okay? So I believe that, and I'm starting to see, for example, ethereal sounds like pads or not so organic instruments are starting to get, you know, placed in different kind of scenarios, just like going back to the point of Steve, how can we engage on a kind of a user experience or player's experience? How can we foster it or improve it, right? So I think we're going to that direction, like mixing was, on music. How can we get the most out of it? And how do we differentiate that from non-diegetic and diegetic music on a virtual world, for example, right? That has, I believe it has like a raised and maybe pitbull, and I think we're coming back to VR once again, but it's pretty interesting how.
In the audio field, there's a very similar thing happened about 10 to 15 years ago. Ambisonic mics. It's a 6 microphone array that does left, right, forward, back, up, down. And that way you can, if you record with that, you can then mix it and project it in any number of speakers or arrays by just mapping those coordinates onto your speaker coordinates and playback. That also, I mean, there were some great demos, when it first came out where, if you were wearing headphones, you could literally turn around and it would be like the first one was a guy in his kitchen, just making stuff. You'd hear a blender and hands, because those sounds localize very well. If you clank on a tin can, man, you can, with your eyes closed, you can point to it and right there it'll be. But low frequencies don't localize. So for instance, if you bring a tuba player in this room, close your eyes and have them start to play, people will be pointing kind of in the general direction. And the problem is music takes up usually a full spectrum. So there was this thought, okay, great, we'll have, it'll sound like you're sitting in the concert hall. Well, unfortunately with recording, localization doesn't work on every instrument equally. So you'd hear, a good example is the end of the movie Yellow Submarine. They recorded a little orchestral mix in ambisonic and all digital, and it does sound like you're sitting in the concert hall. But you can pick out where the pillow is, where the triangle, where the glockenspiel, all the little thingies, but the rest of it kind of just sounds like a nice stereo mix. So that's one of the challenges with music, because it's a full spectrum. But there are very cool tools that would allow it so that you can have it sound like it will always start in front of the listener and go over their head to behind, like if there's an arrow shooting. That's something that there's a free app called SoundPack does that now. Look up SoundPack. It processes, you can use the binaural filter. SoundHack, H-A-C-K. And yeah, you can make sounds do that, but again, the sounds have to be localizable. In other words, they have to be really sizzly or have a real, if you have a maraca or something with multiple attacks or crunchy sounds, those are great. But if you have like a pad or a whoa sound, good luck. It's just going to, you can't localize.
Yeah, that's going to be an assumption.
Yeah, that's one of the differences between music or sound and visual. Visuals, you can, obviously our eyes are great at localizing, but sound, some are, some aren't. Some are invisible sounds, that you just cannot localize.
So if you've been to like an XD or an IMAX theater in the past few years, they run this stupid Coca-Cola trailer. It's way overcooked, it's way overproduced, and it's just like, look what I can do with localized sound. But it does illustrate that pinpoint accuracy you can get with either a 7-point or even a 9-point speaker system. What is, getting back to your original question, what is now getting more democratized with Dolby audio, even in headsets, you can get that hyper-localization without multiple speaker placements. They figured out how to do like some pretty crazy stuff. And so I'd encourage you to play with the Dolby tools. And then I guess I'm drifting into tools and things to learn, but 100% I would say if you aren't already using Unreal, download it, learn it, because what used to be like Wise and other very expensive tools are now baked into the core feature set in Unreal and in Unity as well. So I would say get very, very familiar with those tools, what you can do in there. There's a lot of good examples of how they do sound placement. Are we covering just music, or are we talking about sound as well?
No, sound,
That sounds- okay,
sound
so-
design is this afternoon.
Always a stretch goal to be able to play your game without the monitor on. So there's a really, really good GDC talk from, I think, 2016 or 17, I forget which, but the Overwatch team did like a good hour on it, and it's available in the Vault and everything. I know we have access to the Vault. I'm not sure if you have GDC Vault, but anyway, I can find that video for you if you need it. But really, really good masterclass on how they do. They use occlusion, they use ambience, they use reflection, they use prioritization, and all that. They did theirs in Wise, but that's all baked into Unreal now. So plus some custom coding to make it work. But for instance, prioritizing the sound of your enemies over the sound of your teammates, right? So if you're playing Reinhold or whatever, and you're on my team, and you're playing Reinhold and you're my enemy, it's much more important I know where you are, and I hear you coming than to know where he is. Because he's going to take care of his thing, but I need to know where you're coming so I can find you and go at you, right? So understanding in mastering how to create a soundscape, not just in static format, but how it relates to the importance of gameplay cues. I think is that next level of mastery that you can focus on beyond just creating a soundscape, right? Really understanding, sitting with the GD, the game director, game designer, and understanding what is important about the gameplay, what we need from the sound. So if I'm walking over materials and that's not important to gameplay, it's nice. It's a nice level of polish. But if that actually plays into cueing a sense of danger, or I'm now in a different combat mode, or I'm in a place where, let's say I'm walking through here, but I have to be super stealthy, and then the floor becomes lava because anything I walk on in here is going to click and echo and do all kinds of stuff 2 stories up, right? Then that's a whole different approach to prioritizing the sound and the soundscape. And the music can feed into that as well to support it, but yeah, sound design is definitely evolving. I'd say more than the music, the ability for the power you have with tools that are available to you now for free is just off the charts.
That's super interesting because I want to rescue what Steve talked about the hierarchy of sounds. For me, like you're talking about how the enemy sound have to be prioritized on the alley, like friend sounds. I think that's super important because that will give us, like a kind of a hierarchy of, okay, so what sounds do we need to prioritize, at least, for example, if we're producing those sounds, right? So maybe we have to focus more on, getting certain sounds first, and then we can have, other sounds later, but also how to make them behave in a mixing kind of world, right? For example, in Wise, and I bet in UE5 will have that exact same thing about the monitor control, or the mixing console, it's called in Wise. And what you can do is just, having, trigger several sounds at the same time, and with certain parameters, you can start tweaking sounds, adding reverbs and stuff, and make call to certain events to vote, for example, what it will happen if those kind of steps are in this certain kind of room or hallway or blah, 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 blah. And see, like, most importantly, or master failure, that we have to make sure it doesn't click, right? Because maybe we're adding also music, so it gets a little bit like very complex. So I think we can talk like a lot about mixing Wise, how sound effects in that case have to be like really, really on top of the music.
I'll add one thing to that, which is if you are recording and you're doing Foley work, let's say to record footsteps on marble, you want to do that in a neutral environment because you'll be adding in the reverb, you'll be adding in the occlusion, you'll be adding in the ambience at runtime, but it's situational, right? So if you record and your master track has a bunch of echo and reverb and a lot of volume and space to it, then it'll be really hard to control that when you need to, right? So as a, for instance, same material, but now I'm in a very, like a tube, and I'm crouching, right? It's a very different sound, but if that's embedded in your original sound, then you're going back in and Pro Tools or whatever and messing with your master. So, you know, I always take the approach on your Foley work to record in as neutral environment as possible, and then you add the effects, if you will, later on based on gameplay. I'll add the one tool, which is if you sponsor, and we're set up, we're going through it right now for WISE, Audio Kinetic. We're getting the legal cleared, but I think we can get you in under that umbrella. You sponsor a class, then they can have access to those very expensive tools for free under education. You can't use them for capstone because we publish and we get, and it's a whole licensing.
Are you using WISE?
No, because of that.
Okay.
Once we go, we don't for capstone, and it's too advanced for earlier TPPs, but because we publish, it flips the license and it's not educational anymore, and we owe them tons of money and they have IP rights, and it's like, no. But it's a great tool for you all to learn, just because it is one of the, I'll call it, you know, 3 or 4 main tool sets in gameplay right now. Game authoring, the Kill Encounter in the next 4, 5, 6 years. It will evolve. There will be new tools. There will be different things. But
we're talking about UE5.
Well, UE4 is now at feature parity with WISE under the hood. The WISE UI is still much better. Your control panel, your mixing board, all that stuff is still much better than what's available in UE4. UE5, I don't think they're evolving. They're focusing mostly on graphic stuff, so I don't think they're going to evolve. Like revolutionize the audio side of it. So 4 is fine for learning on the real side of things.
Yeah, definitely keep me in the loop there, and we'll get
I'll let
electronic music studio.
Yeah, we're working through some
license
licensing hiccups right now with SMU Legal, but we should have that resolved this week. But that'll give you access to a very expensive tool set that people are using out in the world. The challenge we've got is we're finding at the studios out there, they're locked into some version of it like 3, 4 years ago. So the current tool set will be current when you get out and try and get your jobs out in the world.
Will this only be available to people taking that class, or will it be available to the entire university?
In order to get access to the tools, you would have to get sponsored through a course. So he would have to hook you up. But once you do that, you just register the course, and then it's just for you to legally do it is a little bit of a hoop jumping exercise that we're going through right now. I'm pretty sure we can get you in under ours once we get that signed.
And on sound design, I've got to re-emphasize what you said about clean, dry sounds. I know it's easy to just take your iPhone and go out and say, I'm going to get sounds of walking in leaves or walking on gravel, and all that external noise coming in and the ambience that can be, you know, if you're walking indoors. You can, you know, one of the things we do in recording techniques, just go through we call it pillow fortresses in our house. You know, you sit in your apartment, you just got pillows lined up around you, and you're inside a pillow fort recording some sounds, just to get rid of all the external stuff so that it's dry and pristine, because it's like soup. Once it's mixed in the original sound, you can't take it out. But you can always add ambience and panning and reverb and all those wonderful things only after, if it's not there to start with. So
your closet looks well too.
Yes, I use my closet and hang bath towels and stuff. Yeah, those are in my electronic music class. That the sound of that beer bottle opening and pouring thing was in my apartment, and I had to do it in the closet, hanging extra bathrobes, and then tucking along the lower door seams so that no sound came in there. But yeah, that's
Honey, what are you doing in there?
I'm just recording a beer bottle opening. You know, no, it's a 7-Up act.
Yeah, that's called, I think, bleeding. When the audio bleeds inside your original audio source, it's those all like unnecessary sounds that gets or bleeds inside the audio signal, right? So you don't want that. And I don't know what I want to say, but yeah, bleeding.
No, it's important.
In I think another related skill set is just taking library assets. So if you're not doing the Foley work, then you can pull, we just got access to the sound source library.
Oh, yeah.
Which is
Effect
basically everything, right? So we've got license to that. And that's what we do on most of our games upstairs is just pull from a library. We're not doing original recording unless somebody knows how to do that stuff. We have that capability too. But it's great.
That's actually easier than, making your own, and 99% of the time, if you've got something really close, it's all about taking that and maybe just tweaking the sound a little bit.
Yeah, you can always modify it. But
Yeah.
They're walking around with the $3,000 microphones. We can't afford it.
Exactly. Exactly.
Let them do that hard work. You can take it and customize it for your game.
That's why the importance of having an effect library that's ready to go.
Show hands, are these the students that are working on the capstones?
Some aren't, yeah.
Okay.
Got two.
Which game are you on?
So I'm in the screen team. So
Okay.
Well, that's Monster in there. I had a changing in it. Yeah, our name is still up in the air. So
Yeah, we go by colors
the names
upstairs
go
because the
all
names are very fluid. But so Monster and Cowboys for you. Yeah, the Cowboy one. By the way, you're doing the music.
Me and two others.
Okay, so the first track that got delivered made the rounds in the building because it was just like really cool stuff, and I think it adds a lot of atmosphere. Yeah. So you'll have a major piece in telling the story and setting the tone for. You're doing a lot of the heavy lifting on what we can't show because we can't animate beyond what's in the game. But there's no cutscenes or anything like that. So we're going to be leveraging the music and the soundscape a lot.
And that's really interesting because when music is early in the process, it inspires artists and programmers to continue or find out other ways on how the story could be.
They've brought that up specifically. Like they've specifically asked me to send in work even if it is unfinished.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Because it's great for morale and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so we do things upstairs called like Daily Show and Tell. And if it's cool, it goes up on the screen and everybody celebrates it. I'm trying to find it for the rest of here. But I gotta find the channel. We can keep talking more.
Yeah, the workflow is so different from traditional composing or even film cinematic composing because it's linear. And when you break linearity, it's because it's composers. One of the challenges for non-composers understanding us, time is our canvas that we paint on. And when you suddenly say, well, now it's not just time, but we're working in, 7-dimensional time where time can exist over here in combination with this, or sometimes layered with this, but this might interact with this time. And that's very cool, but it will usually give a moment of panic. So even a really great composer will just suddenly be, it's like you totally pulled their world out from under them. Or I use the 7-dimensional jump because suddenly you are not in reality anymore. You're in this segmented, layered, abstract zone, and it does take a little time to adapt, definitely. So if you are bringing newer composers in, you have to allow for a little bit of that lag time of it reconceptualizing how you think about music, because it is totally different and very disorienting at first. But then it's liberating because you realize all the really cool possibilities.
So whenever that kind of stuff is overwhelming, I remember that ultimately, as the player will experience, it is linear. Like that's how they feel it.
Perceive it, yeah.
And so you can sort of think about it on that level when you're still conceptualizing things. It's like, okay, well, if the player does X, Y, and Z, then what would be the linear experience you want? And when you have a bunch of those examples, then you can start breaking it down and see, okay, what does actually happen?
I'm curious, do you see games as moving towards more non-linear, or definitely that's.
I mean,
exactly. There's very much a linear game anymore. Yeah.
It does remind me. What are your thoughts on? So we've been talking about music systems that are interactive, but that's still on the game side. There's also, it's not as common. There's also systems where essentially players are interacting directly with the music. The obvious example is like a rhythm game, where your input has to be synchronized with or quantized to the music. But there's also other examples. I played Wonder Song. In that game, there's a bunch of instances where you actually are asked to just write a little melody, and there's no restrictions on rhythm or anything like that. I'm trying to formulate this into an actual question, but I guess where do you see those kind of elements going, where it's more player input, like true input towards the music, not just
Sounds like
reacting
the
to what's
town theme
happening?
and Animal Crossing.
Yes, that's another example.
So, Beat Saber, and tying in what you were saying,
Beat
like
Saber.
VR, you're in the headset. It's a very claustrophobic experience because you got the headphones on usually, but you have the ability to create environmental audio in a way that isn't really possible on a flat screen. Right? You're projecting into an imagined 3D space as opposed to in VR, it's a literal VR space, a literal 3D space, right? So on Beat Saber, for instance, they do a few things that are really interesting. Yeah, the timing is there, certainly, but it's not as much timing based as like Guitar Hero or
No.
some of the earlier stuff is. It's more.
If I remember correctly, the scoring is more based on what the angle of how you attack and
Right.
follow through, which is fascinating because that's only something you can only do in VR.
So here's the subtlety. Beat Saber does this, but getting to where games are heading, certainly, but I think they're kind of there now. As the tools become more sophisticated, you can start to do these next level sound interactions, and it's all about, if it was precise, like if a certain trigger in my world, let's say in Beat Saber, like the exact second, or the exact millisecond the saber hits the block, right? But that's out of syncopation with the music. They do some subtle stuff where they're shifting it just a little bit, but it's not perceptible to you unless you're one of you all and everything's ruined, right? Because you're you're seeing the matrix for what it is. But most players don't catch that subtle shift in things, but it's hitting on beats, or it's picking up beats, or it's adding layers, but not instantly and out of syncopation, but actually on beat or in measure. And getting to a place where that's not abrupt and noticed, I mean, you're doing your job, but players don't notice it. All they notice is that it feels like they're making the music, right? I think probably one of the best examples of that is the Tetris effect on PlayStation.
Right. Yeah, of course.
Just fantastic soundscape on that. And if you unlock everything, you can go back and deconstruct, like you can do it interactively, like without actually playing the game. You can walk through the steps and the layers that build the music up over and over again, and how they're reinforcing that with the particle effects and how the music, like some of the particle effects are audio based, so they're dancing to the music a little bit, but the input is that time shifted thing, that really subtle time shifted thing. So what it feels like is just this seamless, immersive experience. It's incredibly technically advanced under the hood, but the player, it's lost on the player. But if you didn't have that subtlety, if you didn't have those shifts, if you didn't have that artistry to it, it would just sound horrible. It would just sound horrible.
Yeah, I think that's called the RTPC, and WISE, for example, real-time environmental controllers. So how good are you, like, assigning stuff or objects, and how the music or sound are reacting to it. For example, I don't know, if the saber goes a little bit faster, you have that RTPC shifting a little bit, that audio sample, I don't know, like a little bit sooner or maybe faster, right? With a little bit increasing its pitch or something like that, and you can do it in real time. So that's really awesome.
And another thing you'll have to worry about that the player will never understand is input lag and response lag, especially in VR, right? So you can't rely on that button press being exactly tied to the frame that thing collides or appears or whatever.
That is
you'll have to build some
exact,
swapping.
and it's the same thing when we trigger virtual libraries. It's the exact same thing. We're triggering, like our key, and it's not going to happen at the same time. It's just like a little bit delayed, if we're triggering like a violin library, and then you will get access to, to an audio sample, and it will trigger a legato or a short, depending on the song that you selected. It's the exact same feeling, and you're like thinking that you're playing an instrument, but you're only navigating between samples inside multiple folders, for example.
I think this all speaks to, there's authorship, the ability to record the Foley and do all that, and the composition piece of it where you're imagining the soundscape and you're assembling the pieces and all that. But there's a layer that I think any sound designer and probably increasingly any interactive musician, you're going to have to get pretty familiar with blueprints, which is coding without coding. Blueprints in Unreal, analogous scripting in Unity. You don't need to get nuts and bolts into object-oriented C++ programming, but you do need to be familiar with some of the terms and be able to manipulate the sounds and deal with variables and deal with inputs from the game without having to rely completely on a programming team. Right? I think that's going to be an increased skill set for any professional game sound designer. I don't know one, I haven't yet met one that doesn't have a good foundation of programming under them.
That's something that in computer music we hit a similar problem with, that there were several different environments. There was C Sound or Super Collider or Max, and so you're like, well, oh my gosh, which language should I learn? Do you know if there's any talk of a kind of a standardization of a audio programming scripting?
Well, I think between Wise and Unreal, taking effort to provide UI on top of this stuff, you're not hard coding anymore.
Right.
So understanding the tools and the UI that are available there and the concepts that are available there. Blueprinting in Unreal it's all visual, right? You're taking an object, it's got some settings on it, and you're literally drawing a line between this and this other thing, and so you get an input, and it comes into your sound, and your sound is this thing on your blueprint. It's not programming, but it's based on programming. And being able to understand even basic blueprints, I think, will be a requisite skill set for you.
Very similar to Max.
What you saw this morning in Max, it's the exact same thing. It's object, and then you have your audio stream and your command lines, and that actually is based on C++. And so the objects within it are all, you're actually creating behind the scenes. It's a middleware that creates the C++ algorithms, but you can add new objects, and when they opened it up to the community at large, that's when the language just exploded. And suddenly everyone was creating objects and sharing them, and then the Cycling 74 would integrate those new ones, and now they've expanded it to video, so it's got jitter, and Max are now joined together for doing video processing effects based on the sound, based on the input. And as I was looking over Blueprint, I was thinking, that's going that direction. That would be really cool if they could get if the programmers over at Cycling 74 would get on with Unreal. That would be pretty incredible, because then you could have gameplay where multi-users would be creating multiple soundscapes that would interact with each other and affect the music interactively too, in a synchronous manner, and even generate new themes working together or something. I mean, the composers always sees all the wonderful, wow, wouldn't that be cool?
I'm talking about what Steve said about, programming, like there's different levels of how you can approach programming or your level of knowledge. For example, I had like some small courses of C++, but I'm not into, like programming, like barely like a beginner level. But for example, I can provide these useful tools that, communicates effectively in a kind of a C++ manner to the programmers. Or for example, I can create small batches of events on WISE. So when there's time to program the audio stuff on the engine, they just plug WISE into the program and they just call for events instead of creating all the code from scratch. So you can have, all these kind of small added values to your service when it comes to programming, right?
So you mentioned you were on Monster Wrangler, right? Yes. So this is a good example. This is a game where you have these little elemental monsters. They're not really monsters, they're incredibly cute plushies that, whatever. What we have, each one sort of has a different personality. And there's like super puppy energy from them, and they're little toddlers, and they're kind of running around, and you're influencing them through giving them food, right? They're food motivated toddlers. Think of it that way. They can blow up everything because they sneeze fire, right?
Reminds me of Gremlins.
Yeah, kind of a little bit. Don't get them wet.
The Incredibles.
So yeah, Jack from The Incredibles was an inspiration for the mayhem and the chaos they can have, right?
Okay.
So where I'm going with this is in the music, you have an opportunity where maybe they have little instrumentation signatures. So the fire monster has one. The earth monster has another, the ice has another, right?
We're working on for the kind of main background stuff. We're going to have vertical layering, each kind of monster has a different layer. To identify as that monster, this type. For the earth, we're going to have a different system, the fires and the trumpets.
And you can go, one emergent need we have, I'm sure Cam will talk to you about this, but one thing we're discovering through our playtesting is, like, we lose them. Like, so we're going to need to know, like, getting back to the hyperlocalization of the sound, so we'll need something in the higher registers to be able to position the audio and, what they're doing. So there'll be an animation layer, maybe they'll hop up and be bounding through the grass like a dog does, and there it is. Or, there's a little mushroom cloud where they're blowing stuff up, but there's a sound layer to it as well, where where's the fire monster? So if I close my eyes and listen, I should be able to pinpoint that and know it's fire as opposed to earth, who's over there.
And that might be like a sound effect as opposed to. I know we had talked about it, they didn't want to necessarily have different layers coming from the monsters because I might confuse them as like, are the monsters themselves musical? But there's not there. I think that kind of a sound effect.
So there's an interesting, this is just an example of emergent need. As we go through our evolutions on the milestones, we're getting it up on screen and figuring out what's fun, what's not. We're cutting the things that aren't, and we're discovering, that I think is the story of Monster Wrangler in a sense, where this is not where we started. When we started making this game, it was a puzzle game, and now it's this whole just puppy energy experience where it's got some puzzles, but we're just spending time with these monsters doing things and trying to influence them and nudge them and coerce them into causing things to happen in the environment so we can make our way through. But part of that becomes these emergent needs on the soundscape and on the sound cueing and the music layers, where we don't know where we start. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. We know where we start. We don't know where we're going to end up from that stuff. And it's a process of, in our case, our sprints are every 2 weeks. We're trying to deliver a different milestone that answers a different question, right? So this next one that's coming up is going to be first playable, and it's going to be playable beginning to end, but it's not quite feature complete. It's sort of the last pass at understanding the game, how much of the game we're making, and then the next milestone is about just getting the features in that we need, and then from there on out, it's polishing it out. So that we're getting out of the phase of discovering what we need out of the game, and then how we're going to start tackling these problems, right? So I bring this up only because it's illustrative of the process, right? If we knew exactly where we were going to end up when we started, then we're making spreadsheets, we're not making games. It's creative rocket science. So we're reinventing 15 different things each time out of the gate, and sound is part of that, right? It needs to serve the game in a sense. Just as narrative, we don't write the narrative before we start the game, we wrap the narrative around whatever game it is at the end, so we don't have to further work out. You'll run into this, I think, on the voiceover layer. So here in, we're not doing voiceover in your game, but we also partner with Christy Dana, who also at Meadows, but they do the voice acting side of things for us, but we don't bring them in until the very end. So we're a little abstracted on how we do it here, but out in the world, when you are working with, let's say you're doing Horizon Zero Dawn in the next one, right? You're working with Ashley Birch, who's the actress who does the main character. She will come in, do an initial laydown on some temporary tracks, and maybe she'll come back 3, 4, 5 times. But your minor characters maybe just come back like for one round of re-record. So what you want to do is you want to time that just enough where it's just helpful enough to help you prove out the game, and then you can make the changes you need without doing a very expensive voiceover. So let's say you've got a star actor who's not scale, but is very expensive, and that's $100,000 a day. You want to make sure you're using that time carefully. So it's just an approach to an iterative design in a stage delivery that will impact you all if you're doing the sound design as well, right? So we may think it's going to be this, like Cowboy Wizards didn't even start out cowboy. It started out remedial magic school, right? So it was like Hogwarts, but all Ron Weasley. And it's now magic infused, like it's a cowgirl, Charlotte, and there's ogres and trolls and whatever they're fighting. So it's like magical creatures, but set in the old West. So if you were doing the instrumentation for remedial magic school 6 months ago, you would have been doing a very different, lots of Hogwartsy stuff. And now it's all twang and guitar and lots of layered, with maybe some of that musical cueing, or the magical cueing.
Some live listening.
So be flexible. My point is, be flexible. Be ready. It's a ride.
If you get someone,
It's a partnership and a ride.
Adaptability too.
I'm seeing a real fusion between sound design and music, because as you
I
get
hardly
more
differentiate the two.
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah, and when you're working in Omnisphere or some of these synths, and the music and the sound effects are often created in the same program. I mean, using the same synth, it's using different patches. You use this attack with maybe some sparkles from this, and mix it with that, and so they're so overlapped now that I really see it coming together.
Yeah, it's a very tight Venn diagram.
Yeah.
And I would even go as far as like, not all musicians are the other way around. Not all sound designers are musicians,
Right.
but all musicians are sound designers. Yeah.
Except two questions, but the most important first one is of any postmortems or books or talks talking about iterative design and like sound design working well or not well?
Off the top of my head, I'll point you in directions. Again, the GDC Vault is probably the best repository for that stuff, because they'll do entire hours on
Whatever you want. Yeah.
attenuation. It's like, who cares, right? Except you all care passionately about this stuff, and I'll go deep on it. So GDC Vault, Gamma Sutra, which is now like Game Developer.
They have some good stuff there, though.
Yeah, and both of those have archives going back decades.
Very honest stuff.
Yeah, at Kama Sutra. Then you have Audio Kinetic channel on Twitch.
Mhm.
Oh, those guys invite, like, once they get each game gets released, they invite all the audio team and they talk about their integration, as long as they use one. Most of the time it is. So
Yeah,
they go
most
really
of the big
deep
games
into
are wise.
very specific stuff. Yeah, they go into the session and they will explain about anything. So Audio Kinetic is a company who made Wise, and they have a Twitch channel. and they always go live each Thursday most of the time, and they will invite composers, sound designers, entire audio teams, blah 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 blah. And they really dig into the important stuff.
As far as like indies go, you want to just look up names of composers. I know Lana Rain, for instance, they have a really nice article detailing all the sounds she was using in Celeste to make that music. He wrote something on trickery, which came out recently, and I haven't read that.
Yeah, and the pandemic has kind of screwed GDC up. But what they'll do is, like a Sony first-party team will get released to talk about their stuff. So that's why you'll get an entire GDC where like 5 or 6 different sessions are on God of War, right? So I know God of War did a good run on some of the audio stuff. The Horizon Zero Dawn team did a big run on it in, I believe, 2017, and I think those are for free now. So even if you don't get access to the libraries on there, you've got access to like some of the other stuff. And I remember the last one pre-pandemic was Spider-Man. So that team came in and did a few talks on the soundscape of the city, and some of the combat stuff as well. But probably the best one in recent memory, just talking about the pure technical aspects of designing for gameplay, is the Overwatch one. I'll try and find that for you.
Sorry, I pulled it up. It's the elusive goal, play by sound.
Yeah, that's it.
Like we did with all the previous sessions, email me the links and like what they are, and then the link, and I will create a list of all the links that we've discussed here and that you want to share, and put them on the workshop webpage. And then that way you can just go.
There's a really good book. It's not on the iterative process, but it's on the technical aspects. I'm going to fudge the name. I think it's like game audio in Unreal Engine or something like that. Oh, I've got it upstairs. I'll go find it. It's a little spendy, but what they have are these sample chapters. Each chapter has like a game that they made that shows how they did a specific implementation in certain techniques. And yeah, I don't like recommending books that are over $50. It's kind of insane, but this is one of the ones that actually has really good lessons, really good sample code that you can look at and understand attenuation, occlusion, and how those impact gameplay specifically. That's one of our good references that we use for our students here. And I bought a bunch of copies and I have them upstairs. They can use them, so they don't have to buy them. The other challenge is written a little while ago, so the engine versions have come along quite a bit since then. But that's a good one. I'll get to that one as well. It's a good one.
Do we have I'm wondering, do we have a resource site that we could maybe collaboratively build up that would...
We put all our stuff on the wiki, but you all don't, you might, but they won't have access to our wiki.
Yeah.
But it's just our Confluence instance.
Might be something we might set up as a kind of a...
But yeah, if you set up a page, I probably will have access to that, because I don't think Meadows...
Yeah, Meadows is so far behind on...
Well, anybody can add to the wiki. It's just our workspace in the wiki, the Guildhall instance. And you can see it. You might be able to get in, but I don't think they would be able to without special permission. They have access.
Yeah, they're on.
Anybody that's assigned to that class will have access to that, our wiki. So you've got access to all our sound stuff. So if you go under, so in our workspace, if you go under TGP, no, not Slack, in the Guildhall wiki, wiki.smu.edu, and then you look for the Guildhall workspace. Under that, you'll see TGP resources, and under that, you'll see a bunch of sound stuff. But if they aren't in the class that's collaborating, then they won't have access to that.
Because we'll be having composers cycling in each year, and some of them will be enrolled in classes, some of them doesn't fit their schedule, so they do it.
It's not letting me log in.
Yeah,
You're supposed to have access. I'll double check that.
yeah, but that's one of those things that's always nice, is to find anytime we can share resources that would help get anyone who's doing sound design collaboration, whether it's in a course or not, here at SMU, able to get those resources and get started. So before they get into class, they're already hitting the ground running. That's one of the problems we had this year. So some of the students were great composers, but they were coming from composition into, oh my gosh, the wacky world of not writing linear concert music, and
So many stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
Music production, technology. Then after that, gets the film scoring, non-linear, linear music, non-linear, how to deal with interactivity. It's a bunch of stuff.
yeah.
I'll ask you a question. So last year, pandemic, your students were all over Central and South America, working with our teams when we were still in Plano, but here. Were there any, I'm trying to think of a way to ask this question, which is, are there skill sets that they can be developing on listening to feedback, getting feedback, even if it's super remote and far away?
Yeah, so the way we work, I started like asking, like my students who would want to join, and they needed to have these skills ready. For example, music production, that they need to know about working on the DAW, and also send some of the portfolios so I can see some of their work, right? And after that, we'll meet each week so we can hear each other's work. And moreover, it's not just the music, but the communication. How are they doing with the things? Are they communicating effectively? Do they understand? You being like with, maybe there was a Colombian guy with his accent, and maybe it could be some trouble. It was like, no, I'm perfectly fine. Like, okay, awesome. So now let's jump into the music. So all these kind of things. So communication first, and make like a certainty that all the composer gets the vision and what they really need to deliver to the game developers, and from there we start working on the music. So always will be communication first, then let's see the music, right? In that case.
And then working with your GD, the game designer is the person in charge of what the game is. Working with your GD, I think, is a learned skill set of establishing a common vocabulary. Sometimes you're dealing with somebody who isn't musical at all. So then I find it's really helpful to just have that GD pull reference of things they like, and more importantly, things they don't like, as they're thinking about the game. And then you all can listen to that collaboratively, and important questions to be asking while you're listening to that is like, what do you like? What is it about this that you like? Oh, I like the trumpets, or whatever that instrument's called. And you can start to break it apart. It's not maybe the whole musical or the melody, it's maybe some instrumentation. So asking what you like and what you don't like is a really key piece of that. So once you have an established vocabulary, a common vocabulary, I think it's really helpful to, on your side of it, to be able to ask, this is what I'm thinking. Like as you're starting to compose things, before you get too far down a road, even work in progress, even some just instrumentation, maybe some melody work. It's not the score yet, it's not the final product by any stretch. I think where we run into trouble is like you hold it close, it's not ready yet, it's not ready yet. And then you deliver it and it missed the mark, and then you wasted all that time. Right? So it's helpful to, and this is getting at your iterative approach, right? Understanding what the objectives are, not for the game, but what do we need for this delivery, right? So this first delivery, here's what I'm thinking. It's going to have this, it's going to sound typical, it's going to evoke this tone, or it's going to sound like this other piece of music, it's whatever, cliche. And if you have that established vocabulary and you can describe it in words before you start doing the hard work, then your chances of hitting it on the mark the first delivery increases. And then you can go from that to improvement as opposed to having to backtrack and rework something. I think as I've worked with musicians and sound designers over the years, that initial month or two is like super critical to downstream success. So establish that vocabulary, talk about what you're going to deliver before you deliver it. Don't be afraid to share work in progress, and just make sure you're not getting too far down the road. If you're going like a week without talking to your GD or delivering some piece of music, then that's potentially a week that you'll have to read it if you miss it. So good, clear communication is the key to that iterative development. You're doing it together. It's not you in a room by yourself just throwing it over the wall. It's a collaborative process. And then, the last piece of it, like I mentioned and talked about earlier, was just be ready for change. Like if the game changes direction, I promise you they're not going to be asking the sound designer what they think. They're going to be informing you. We're going Western now, and here's why. Hopefully they get to the why, and if they aren't, then that's certainly a valid question. But if you're coming at it with what's on screen is the most important. We're serving little Timmy, not you, but the customer, right? Who that player is. And if it's good for that player, then that's why we're doing this, right?
There's something I learned this last year on Zoom. When you're having group meetings, several people in the Zoom session with you, the individual windows are pretty small, and so your nonverbal cues, the facial expressions, aren't going to get picked up. When we do private one-on-one composition lessons, they were very effective over Zoom because we can just see the person as if they were sitting across. So I might suggest when it gets to getting overall concepts, schedules, asset lists, things like that, group meetings are great. But when it comes down to here's my first music file, see if you can just if it's via Zoom or remote, have it just with the game designer, just with GD, and keep their face on there, pin them to the home screen, so that you can see the reactions. Because it might be they're playing and they're going along, they're going, and then they get a sour face. Well, you started on the right track, but something happened at that point that screwed it up. Yeah, and they may not be able to describe what it was. But you on your part and with the art form, you might recognize, oh, wait a minute, that's where I did this odd harmonic shift. Well, you say, oh, I went to a chromatic median chord, and they're thinking, blah, 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 blah. That means nothing. But if you can see the reactions, it's so much more helpful. And then the screen annotation, you can highlight things, show a sound file, and just say, as it's playing, you're watching it, you can go, here, that was the moment. What happened there? That sucked. Take it out. Okay, great. Then you can get a lot more done. I found it's much more effective.
Like the cowbell in there.
More cowbell. It needs more cowbell.
So a pro tip, like yesterday I told you about the proposal kind of stuff that I really like to be on a Zoom meeting or something before sending it just by itself as a PDF. But also I started since last year, and I found it very effective, like Dr. Frank said, instead of also sending the files, make a Zoom meeting and let them hear it with you. But now I know that Zoom, when you share sound on Zoom, there has a compression, and I think it just shares it on a mono kind of signal.
You have to go through and check all the boxes at the bottom. They've added the new music things where you have to enable stereo, enable high resolution sound. But even then, for sound design, it's terrible because it compresses down at about, you won't get any sound above 16 kilohertz. It reduces all the things that we use to localize sound occur in the 16 to 20 kilohertz register. And that's the first thing that gets cut in MP3 and audio compression for the internet. So we always say it takes every sound and it flattens it to 2 dimensions instantly.
So yeah, sorry. So there's this plugin called Audio Movers, okay?
Mhm.
And it's well, it's the company Audio Movers, and they have a plugin that it's Listen to, okay? So with Listen to, you put it as a plugin in your master channel in your DAW, and then you share the screen. You send like a link. It's a web link to your GD or to your film director, and they will stream it via that web. So the audio will be from the web and not from Zoom, and you will have like really high fidelity audio from there. It's going to be delayed, like 1 to 2 seconds, but it's okay. It sounds amazing.
Yeah, Michael Voss did that because his studio had that. So he shared all of his, and Aiden did as well. It was great. You get really good full range fidelity, but I will say it was choppy. It depends on your connection. Yeah, I was surprised how stable it was.
Yes,
We only had a few chops, but there are a couple of different HD audio. You look up that and HD audio streaming services, and outside the latency of a couple of seconds, you can deal with that usually.
So the for student version of that, what I find is helpful, send them the recording file and have them listen to it
Yes.
in their form, through headphones or whatever, so they're hearing the clarity. You don't need the clarity because what you need to know is what they're listening to roughly. Oh, they're in this passage here, they're in this. So where we went from, we have this problem when we're doing milestones remotely and we're trying to show gameplay, same thing, which is like, it's and it's really hard. So what we went to, what we found worked really well was, we throw it up on YouTube. We tell, okay, everybody go watch this. It's, in deep pandemic 2 summers ago, everybody was 100% of the team was remote, and so everybody would go to YouTube, watch it, listen to it, whatever, and come back when they were done. And if everybody's kind of time boxed in that, you may not be synced up with the exact note that they were listening to, but you can watch the nonverbals that way. And I found that was just watching gallery view, and everybody hits the passage, and you usually get like 3 or 4 people, their nonverbals clicked up or whatever. Found that was really helpful. So, if you don't have these fancy licensed expensive tools, just send them the file, let them listen to it. And maybe you're picking up just enough over the speakers or the microphone to understand what they're listening to, and then you go over it interactively there.
I have to find the one that Aiden used because it is free. Mm-hmm. It's free and it streams full range, full spectrum, high def audio.
So it's definitely getting better. It just, you improvise where you can.
And it depends on your local internet connection too. That's that's the biggest thing.
What I would ask is, obviously, now that we're a little bit further out of the pandemic and being less remotely, do you think it's beneficial to play like music tracks in like a nice studio environment, so like DNS or over a nicer studio system? So,
yes, that's not the normal setup, right?
Yeah.
So I like to hit, we can do this before we get out of here. I can take you all upstairs and we can show you sort of our different testing environments. But we have our main game lab upstairs is set up like a living room. It's not $1 million screen. It's not the $30,000 plasma or whatever. It's like consumer grade. It's big. It's nice, but it's something people are playing games on. You want to hear it through the TV speakers. You want to hear it through the laptops. You want to hear it through the janky, Razer $100 headphones. It may make you cry what's happening to your audio, but again, getting back to the little Timmy effect, which is you're making the game for the customer, not for you, right? If they have the $5,000, 7+1 multimedia, like everything, blah blah, great, you reward that. You give them that soundscape. You give them that rich instrumentation. You give them that depth. But at the end of the day, the game has to be playable for most people. You don't want poor audio quality to be a gating item to enjoying the game. So you're delivering at multiple price points, if you will. So getting back to your question, yeah, you're probably mastering in a nice room, but you're also listening to it on headphones, remastering, or tweaking, and you're listening to it on stupid iPhone headphones. Oh, God, kill me. But you know, it's called dog food. You're eating the dog food that your dog eats, right? And hey, that tastes like crap. You're dog fooding with the player. You're experiencing it the way they are, so that it's as good as an experience as it can be for however they're consuming. So, different environments, noisy environments, headphones, sound off is another thing that doesn't affect you all so much because they're just turning it off, but the game needs to be playable sound off as well. And then you have to worry about accessibility, right? That's actually an interesting topic of, you know, the binary of deaf players versus hearing enabled players is one thing, but what's the audio version of colorblind, right? Maybe they don't hear certain registers, right? So you want to make sure your music and your particular sound design are delivering the key information in multiple ways. We tell this to our designers all the time, where make sure you're delivering in threes, right? You've got something obvious, diegetic in the world, but maybe there's a sound, maybe there's also a UI element that's indicating the same thing. So you're reinforcing key gameplay elements, but sound is an important piece of that. I don't know if there's that's probably a whole different class of specialization, but I approach it this way. It's one of empathy. So if you're imagining your target player, but also imagine the fringe cases, right? Colorblind, maybe, you know, I'm deaf in one ear, so I can't hear stereoscopic stuff. Maybe my placement isn't there. And if you built something that's dependent on placement, then maybe that's not working. Think about features that you can turn on and off that would help that. Like mono track or other things. I'm sure I'm winging it right now.
You're hitting
so,
it because as
yeah.
gamers get older,
there's
more.
I wouldn't know what you're talking about, Rob.
No, you know, as people get older, their hearing range drops. And to the point, and especially if they were in the hard rocking era of the 80s, you probably have a roll off at about 16, 17K now.
I have a terrible case of tinnitus, right? So
yeah,
I am listening to everything with a constant hum on time.
Yeah, that's just part of.
And my knees hurt. So yeah.
There we go. It's interesting because this has cycled back to our opening topic with future directions. We're looking at all these cool things that we can do, but if the end user interface of the consumer, the player of the game, isn't there, everything we do with sound placement and stereo and all that gets lost. And so we're at we face this also with in music production. You know, when you realize that, you know, most people are going to be listening through their car stereo speakers. Well, unless you're driving a really high end, like a Rolls Royce with a nice Burmeister system or something, it's not going to be there. So most commercial music production looks at compression and it does get flattened down. And in the studio, yeah, you build it for this, knowing that, I guess the dog food model works real well there. They're going to be the dog food. So I think the thing to watch is going to be the consumer end. I always like the consumer electronics show, seeing, you know, the things that are coming out there are really going to drive, because the technology for sound placement, the computer music conferences for whatever we see there, it's usually 10 years ahead of whatever's coming down the road that you're going to get in tools, because they're in research and development of what makes it do this. But it's so expensive and there's no outlet that can produce it. So it just stays in the Karma lab at Stanford or up at MIT. And then when it eventually trickles down to where now it can be actually consumed by the public, then it becomes commercially available. And then the price plummets dramatically. So all the research in the world does no good if there's no outlet. So I think it'd be interesting to watch, and you could, you know, kind of use that as a pulse of where things can go. But it's interesting too to think of what you just said. We tend to think of a monolithic end base, and then you realize, oh my gosh, no, there's people that can't differentiate this, that they have no high range hearing. What happens if that high tone that you put in is a signal that, you know, the aliens are landing? What if they can't hear that? Oh my gosh, how are you going to cue that? So there's it's a big world now.
So for sure, I think you'll be working with designers and stuff, and you're not worrying about UI. You're just worrying about the music and the audio. But think about, you know, are there different levels I can hit certain pieces of conveyance? And I'm conveying, by conveyance, I mean important pieces of gameplay-specific information, right? Not just atmospheric or secondary or tertiary audioscape, but the things that support the core gameplay. You know, just be empathetic to not just how you experience it, but how others might be experiencing it. And just making sure you're doing the full soundscape, but you're hitting at different levels and trying to be as accommodating as possible for a broader range of audiences. And I think those are the ones that get rewarded with, yes, rewards, but more like they're just higher quality games. You're delivering at that next level. I think is a valued skill set and certainly would be career positive.
Excellent.
Sorry, just one last comment about, you know, like all this value that we're getting from Dr. Frank and Steve. I think it goes back to mixing voice, right? And the way we're delivering to the game's console, right? So you're making a game and you know, or you should know where it's going to go. You know, if it's going to be to the computer speakers, to a 5.1 system, because you are just focusing on a movie that's going to be released maybe in a cinema or on a home theater, or is it a mobile game, right? If it's a mobile game, you should know that low frequencies on a mobile game, they don't exist. So it goes back to what we said on Monday, yesterday, about what if there's dialogue on a movie, right? Or even, in a video game, it's going to go down, right? The same goes to limitations on reproducing the sounds on certain speakers, right? If it's going to a cell phone, it doesn't matter, like what Frank said about the high frequencies, the same thing applies on, you know, on a double bass. If you have like a motif on a double bass playing on the low register on a mobile game, forget about it. It's not going to happen. Okay, so, and that's a waste of your time in composing, right? So be clever on where you're composing for, what element, what devices.
Well, we ran over, but in a very good way. I love a good discussion, and as I said, the discussion doesn't end when the recording does. Recording stops. So keep in touch with us on that, and thanks again, Steve, for coming in, and Guido today. And we'll move on then to the next session, and for sure, any of the links that we have, or for those on Zoom, if you have a link that you think is a helpful resource on sound design or implementation, hey, email it to me. It's on the website, robfrank@smu.edu, and I'll update it. We can use this as kind of a summary of our discussion session. Okay, well, great. Thanks so much. And we'll go ahead and do a little reset online if you're on Zoom, and we'll come back on the same Zoom link for the remainder.